The first company I worked for we were consultants, so we were scattered all over the place, and once a quarter they would gather us all back into our home office for training. And there were several hundred of us, so that was always in like a big hotel ballroom with round tables all around and a stage where the presenters were at. We had a training on racism and sensitivity once. We had a whole weird one time all about etiquette, different kinds of etiquette. Lunch was all of the possible things you can have on a table and who's supposed to take which forks, and I still don't know. So I just wait and see who takes what and go last, and then I know I'm probably okay. But there was a time where we gathered and we were having a particular training because there was a big new sort of hot topic traveling around. I'd gather most of the business world. It was Stephen Covey had written a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Did anybody else have to do that training? Yep, right? So this was a thing, and we didn't do all of it. We had some part of it that was distilled down to us that day. And what I can pretty well guarantee you is that in that room, as we were learning about these 7 habits of highly effective people, there were some people who were completely bought into this as a project. Like you could buy a day planner, I think, that helped you use the 7 habits of the, right? And like there was all sorts of tools. Because how long does it take to build a new habit? It's not a quick process, right? So not only could you read the book, but there were tools to help you do that. And there were people there who were well bought into that. I would also bet that there were people that dozed off, or if they didn't doze off, at least weren't fully engaged because they weren't interested or buying into any of this. I fit somewhere in between. I had read the book. I found it interesting. I took some notes. I probably put those notes somewhere where I forgot where they were and maybe picked up. I can't tell you what the 7 habits are today. And I would bet, though, that there were in that group some people who didn't want really to change all of their habits to be successful, but wanted a quick fix that helped them be. They should have, like you could have had a training, the 7 quick fixes for people who want to be successful but don't want to put the work in, right? That would be a workshop that might draw some people, because change takes effort, and we don't necessarily want change, and I'm sure that there were people there that were wanting a quick fix to their organizational issues, self-organizing, to their struggles to get promoted, whatever it was. Now, that was one particular business fad. They happen. Some of you who have been in the business world or education, wherever you are, there's these new things that come around, and there's always people that are really passionate about it and fully bought into it, and there's always people that are on the edges kind of going, I don't know. And this is true not just of training and those sorts of things, but revolutions, right? When a new revolution starts to build where people are unhappy with the government, there's people that are passionate. And then there's people that when it starts to get a little messy, go, I don't need that much change, right? I'm okay with the way things are. And so we end up landing in these different places when it comes to how much effort we want to put into change, how much we're willing to deal with. That, I think, is the kind of crowd that is probably following Jesus around. Our gospel text starts off today and says there's a crowd with Jesus, and he stops and turns and talks to them. Now, in that crowd were probably people like the disciples who walked away from everything to follow Jesus around, who, though they had a little blip when he died, right, the cross was a bit too much just right away, did come back together and did, most of them, lose their own lives for the sake of the gospel message that they were called to carry. So you had those people there that were bought in, and then you had people probably out at the edge of the crowd that when Jesus turned around and started talking, probably didn't even hear him. They were probably talking to their neighbor, maybe didn't even know why there was a big crowd. Probably they did. But Jesus, unless he just had this unbelievable ability to project in a divine way for everybody to hear him, maybe he did. But I would bet that there were people at the edge that were like, I don't know, we'll see. And I am certain that there were people there who had heard the stories of healings, of demons getting cast out, of these miraculous experiences that people had that sounded like a quick fix to their problems. Now, if you think about those very stories, I don't actually think they're quick fixes. If you were blind and begging and called out to Jesus, and he gave you vision, did that immediately mean all of the broken relationships in your life were fixed? No. Did it mean you automatically could quit begging and you had a job already lined up? No. Did it mean you weren't going to get sick anymore? Nope. Did it mean you were going to not die? No, right? You still had to be a human being. So while Jesus may have done something miraculous to get them past their present struggle, it was getting them past their present struggle to continue to be a human being, which is hard and complicated and painful sometimes, and also joyful and all the other good stuff sometimes. So this was not a quick fix thing that Jesus was doing for these people. And yet, I would bet, just as there are people looking for quick fixes to their business struggles, that there were people in that crowd looking for a quick fix. And so Jesus stops to explain to them we learn a couple of things about the gospel. One is that it's not a quick fix. The other thing we learn is that the gospel, that grace, is honest. And so Jesus stops for a minute to tell them a couple of stories. And they're similar. The one is about somebody building a tower, and you would want to estimate, make sure you have enough resources to build the tower. The other is, if you're going to go to war, probably make sure you can win before you start. Now, there's something interesting to me about these stories. In movies, when somebody's about to get bad news or really good news, sometimes people will say, "Are you sitting down?" Now, I don't know if that's just a movie trope, but my grandma once, after years of struggle, did have a little bit of a windfall, and when her finance guy called her, he said, "Are you sitting down?" Right? In both of the stories today, when Jesus tees up this situation, right? Somebody's going to build a tower. He says, before they take on that heavy work, they sit down and they assess their resources. Before the king sends the army off, the king sits down and assesses the resources. If you think about the stories of Jesus, there's times where he sits down and the crowd sits down with him, and he's inviting them into a place of seriousness. And I wonder if it's not something that when we're moving and busy, it's harder for our minds, most of us, to settle. And so there's an invitation to this crowd to, hold on. You've seen these miracles, you've seen this stuff, you've been inspired by my teaching, but before you start getting too excited about the quick fix and before you think this is going to be something simple, you need some more information. And it's serious information. And then he tells them, you're going to have to hate everything. Now, as I mentioned with the kids, I don't think this means hate in the way we understand the word hate. I think it has something more to do with put Jesus ahead of everything else, and that prioritizing then gets everything else right. But then he does say you'll have to carry the cross. Now, for us, who are a couple of thousand years post-Easter, hearing carry the cross, probably what we think is, well, we all have our suffering that we have to live through, and right, we have ways that we connect with that. But imagine in that time, right, they weren't wearing crosses for jewelry. They did not have tattoos of crosses on their shoulders. They didn't carry crosses into worship spaces because the cross was an instrument of execution of the empire. The cross was a place of death and horrible pain and suffering. They did not know yet that resurrection was going to happen. So as Jesus says, hold on, everybody, we need to have a talk. If you want to follow me, it means there's a cross involved. That had to be shocking, but also I'm not sure they could fully digest it. Part of what I think Jesus is doing is inviting them now to start thinking so that when he ends up on the cross, it's not a complete and total surprise, which it still probably was, and then they had to look back and go, oh, maybe this is what he meant. But it's an invitation to everyone to say, following me is not going to be easy. Luther had this idea that there's theologies of glory and theologies of the cross. Theologies of glory is the idea that we find God in success and suffering, and success and wealth and all the rest of that. So the 7 habits of highly effective people, that's not a theology per se, but if it was, that would be a theology of glory. Like if I decided I'm going to write a book, I'm going to call it The 7 Super Faithful Practices of People That End Up Being the Most Faithful People in the World, and everything goes well for them. That's a theology of glory. And what Luther said about theologians of glory is that they call evil good and good evil. Instead, he said we should be theologians of the cross, because it's on the cross that God meets us in our suffering and our humanity, and it is in the cross that we then find a path to new life. But, he says, right, then that means we meet Jesus in suffering, not in success. And he would say that a theologian of the cross doesn't call evil good and good evil, but calls a thing what it is. What Jesus is doing with this crowd is calling a thing what it is. He's letting grace be honest with them to say, God has set before you life and death, which is what we heard in Deuteronomy. The path of life is indeed the path to life. It's a gift of grace from God, but it's not easy. It requires sacrifice. It requires generosity. It means suffering with one another. It means walking down a challenging path. But it is the path to life. It is a gift. So Jesus has stopped the crowd to speak truth to them, to help them understand that following him is not going to be easy. So all week I've been struggling with a particular image in my head. I've been reading a leadership book called Breathing Oxygen by a guy named Jason Barger. And in it, he talks about, it's like a leadership book, organizational culture kind of thing. And he says, in any organization, you can have people who own the culture of the place, and then others who maybe are just renting. And you know what this feels like. If you go into a business that has a strong culture that is owned by all of the people, you can feel that because it's consistent. If you go from one location to another, you feel the same experience. You also know when someone's just renting the culture, right? It's like the difference between owning your home and renting your home and how much effort you might put into, right, really investing in that place. And so he argues about, organizational culture in that way. And it got me wondering about faith. Do we own our faith? Can we rent our faith? In that whole crowd of people around Jesus, were there owners and renters? And that made me then think about the waters of baptism. When we baptize a little one, we ask the parents to make promises, to bring them among God's faithful people. We promise, along with the sponsors, to help put the Holy Scriptures in their hands. And we do that, right? We give them a little story Bible. And then once they hit 4th grade, we give them another Bible. And when they start confirmation, I give them another Bible, right? Like we walk alongside and help to keep these promises. But then they get to confirmation. And we ask them to stand up and take those promises on themselves. And for a long time, I've thought about that as taking ownership of your own baptism and your own faith. But then I start to think more about that. Like, can we own our faith? Can we just rent faith? And then I started to think, no, it's not our faith that saves us. It's not faith in Jesus that saves us. It's the faith of Jesus that saves us. It's the faith of Jesus that gives us life. It's the faith of Jesus that meets us in death and drags us to new places and makes us whole, even if that means the world around us still is full of brokenness. It is the faith of Jesus that does all of that, so that we don't actually own or rent our faith. It itself is a gift that we get from God. The hard part about the gift is we have different amounts of faith, maybe. Some people never have a doubt, and other people doubt all the time. And all of those are part of this whole body of faith that we are. So we don't own our faith. We don't rent our faith. It is a gift that is the faith of Jesus. But that gift that is the faith of Jesus also then comes with a hard road to walk if we're going to try to follow him. And then I start to think about how hard it can be to be the church. And why is it hard to be the church? Because the church is made up of people. And we disappoint one another. And we hurt one another. And we say things we don't mean to one another. And we do things we don't mean to do, right? And so, as Jesus talks about this hard journey of following him, I don't think we need to spend a bunch of energy up trying to figure out how to make our faith grow, so much as to try to say, well, if this walk of faith that is hard is something that we do as the church, what does that mean then for us as the church? And then I come back to that question again. If we're all gathered in as the church, Are we all in the same place in terms of where we are in our journeys? And the answer to that is no. Just like that crowd with Jesus, we have people who are fully bought into this gospel that are here every time the doors are open. That doesn't mean they're perfect, right? It just means that they are all in. And then we have people who maybe one last time are going to give church a try, or maybe aren't so sure about this God thing, and every step in between. And this is not a judgment about where we are. Where we are is where we are. But Jesus tells us, following me is hard, and if following me is hard, right, there's places along there. And what he says at the end of this passage is, you have to give everything. Not just your possessions, right? You have to be all in if you want to follow me. Are any of us really all in? Not really, right? But Jesus is all in for us, right? The faith of Jesus is the thing that carries us along. So where does that leave us? Well, I think what it means is we do the best we can to own what we do together as church. Whose role is it to welcome new people into the church? That was almost enthusiastic. Whose job is it to work on reconciling our relationships in the church? Somebody at the early service told me that was my job. Whose job is it to tell the stories of where we see God at work in the world? Right? All of us, right? There's this thing, Jesus is inviting us to own that. Not to own that we make ourselves right with God, because he's already done that. Not to own grace. Jesus gives us that for free. The honest part of grace is that life is hard, being church is hard, and yet this is what Jesus has given us as a community of people to carry us along and to share that story of grace with the world. So when we hear a hard passage like this one today, I don't think it means we're supposed to literally, like, mean-spirited hate everybody. It means that we're supposed to try to be all in together, knowing that we're all going to fall short, knowing that we all come at it from different places, but then trusting that somehow the faith of Jesus gathers us all in and carries us along with that grace so that other people can experience it and that we all can be growing in that journey as we go. Amen.